Hello, and thank you for tuning in to the Flatiron Syndicate Motorsports Podcast. This show is brought to you by Flatiron's Tuning, your source for any aftermarket or OEM Subaru parts. Be sure to check out our store at flatirons.tuning.com and stay tuned with Flatiron's Tuning. All right. Welcome back, everybody, to the Flatiron Syndicate Podcast. DP and I are in the shop today. We want to talk about some things. We get these questions not infrequently, and unfortunately, it puts us in the position of being the bearers of some bad news.
Yep.
Which is there's some things out there on the internets, in the ether, that seem like really great ideas that people get excited about doing, that it turns out in most cases are not great.
Yes.
And we refer to this as internally as ruining Christmas. Because a lot of times you guys get really excited about these things, but then we have to we'll walk you through the reasons why it's not such a great idea. You know, it's kind of unfortunate. So we decided, let's just get all this out on the open. Let's have a discussion about it. Let's give you our rationale for why you don't want to do these things.
Yeah.
And so maybe that'll help us all get beyond this and get to doing better mods, making our cars really much better and much faster.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And as it is unflammably hot in here today, this might be a little bit of an abridged podcast, but we'll just see how it goes.
Yes.
All right. So the first one that comes up somewhat frequently is people want to do an STI 6-speed swap in their naturally aspirated Subaru.
Oof.
Could be a Forester, it could be Impreza. Sometimes it's a 2.5 RS. It seems to make sense. We know that it's a better transmission. You get the fanciness of the DCCD. But does this actually make sense? Is this actually a good idea?
This, unfortunately, is not a good idea with stock power levels and stock gear ratios.
Right.
Because, the automatic cars came with, 411 gears. Foresters, come with, 411 gears or 444 gears.
Yeah.
And so you can really utilize the power where it is in the NA car versus the turbocharged car where you need a little bit of a difference
Right.
of where it is.
And the thing that is worth mentioning here that also is usually forgot is in a 6-speed, the extra gears on the low end. It's basically first, second, third is like first and second in the 5-speed. Fifth and sixth gear in the STA 6-speed is the same ratios as fourth and fifth gear in the 5-speed transmission. So those are both overdriven gears. In the naturally aspirated boxes, you only have one overdriven gear. That's fifth gear. But in the turbo cars, fourth and fifth are both overdriven because you've got the power and the torque to push those big gears. That's where you get some of that efficiency on the highway. But if you have a naturally aspirated car, you do not have that what was the technical term? Zhuzh?
Zhuzh? Zhuzh would be that's the good word.
The oomph. You don't have the oomph to push those big gears. And so that's where you could put a 6-speed in your Forester or your 2.5 RS. But not only is the gearing in the transmission taller, but the final drive at 3.9 is also taller.
Yes.
So you're getting hit on both ends.
Right. It's just bad with bad sauce.
I mean, it's something where downhill in a tailwind, maybe get it in 6th gear.
Maybe.
If you're cruising through Kansas and just holding whatever speed, you could probably get into 6th gear and just maybe you get crazy mileage, but. If you had to pass anybody, you're going to have to downshift like crazy.
Yeah, that's going to be a 6-3 downshift.
Yeah, headwind. I mean, you would come to a stop.
It would be brutal.
Yeah, so that's one of these where I wish it made more sense. I wish I could say that it was a great idea, but it just doesn't work because there's just those couple little details that they just come back and get you.
There are some things you could do if you have the budget. I mean, because you could get, they made that 444-1 6-speed.
Yes.
A super limited edition.
Well,
let's see. You could get the front ring and pinion, I think is still out there somewhere, and the rear maybe as well.
So the rear does exist. So there was the STI Type RA version 6. Correct me if I'm wrong here, Nat. But I think it was the version 6 STI. It was right before they went to the 6-speed. But they had the R180 with the 444.
Mm-hmm.
So you can get the R180 with the 444. That still does exist. STI discontinued the front 444 ring and pinion, but Roger Clark has brought it back, and I think there's another company that has brought back that front 444 ring and pinion.
Yeah.
But then you have to have the 1-1 transfer gears,
right,
which are discontinued.
They're not a thing anymore.
Though somebody's got to make 1-1 transfer gears. But yeah, I mean,
but
at that point, not only now are you doing a 6-speed swap, but now you're also converting the front ring and pinion to 444 and sourcing this fairly rare, somewhat rare 444 rear ring and pinion.
Yeah.
That would make it at least somewhat usable.
Yeah, I think that would make it somewhat palatable to drive, but it wouldn't be quite the same.
If it was a rallycross car, that would be kind of fun. But if you switch to 444s, I mean, first gear is going to be pretty low, but I think that would actually work well with a naturally aspirated car.
Yeah.
You still might have some trouble with the 2 overdriven gears though, because again, like the 5-speed boxes, there were like 411s and 1 overdrive. And now you're 444 but 2 overdriven gears. I don't know. It would be tricky.
It might work also in like overlanding, if you were to like.
Possibly.
Just because of how low that first gear would be. But
oh boy, it'd be interesting if you have a Forester that you've lifted, like maybe put a 3-inch lift on, and you've got a much larger tire. The 444s and then that low first gear might actually get it back to the point where the car can actually drive somewhat normally.
Yeah.
But then it would probably still come back to bite you on the highway.
Yeah, I think you'd still be negated in the top end, but
yeah,
I mean,
I don't know. And
overall,
at that point, boy, you're looking at a pretty expensive 6-speed swap.
That's a real pricey one.
It would really have to fit the bill. For a second, I almost came back to it, but just I don't know. I think it just, for the most part, the answer is it just doesn't make sense because of the final drive and the 2 overdriven gears.
Right.
So, okay, the next one that comes up every few months, and as we're recording this is part of the inspiration that came up today. Dry sumping a daily driven car. Taking a Subaru that didn't come with a dry sump and putting a dry sump into it.
Yeah, I just got a phone with a guy today.
Yeah.
That was wanting to do that, and he asked me, he's like, "Well, Mike, what am I looking at?" And I told him it was gonna be about $7,000.
Right, but it's not even beyond the cost. There's some other issues.
I mean, he had to get a tank,
Yeah.
placement. So there's lots of other things that he hadn't really thought about.
The tank is the biggest trick.
Mm-hmm.
Because, okay, so you have your engine. The oil is stored in the oil pan underneath the engine. It's just all there in the engine bay, kept nice and neat. You know where it is.
Yep. You
put in a dry sump. Well, that pan goes away, and you move your oil storage to a tank. Well, now you have to decide where you're going to put that tank. In an optimal case, you could put the tank in the engine bay somewhere. But the thing is this is not a small tank. This tank is, I mean, we use a 3-gallon tank in the Pikes Peak car. That's like 3 times the size of the pan, the stock pan.
Yep.
Depending on the application, maybe you could get away with a 2.5-gallon tank, 2-gallon tank. But then placement of it.
Right.
Like Peterson does make a really skinny, tall, I think it's a 2-gallon tank, but then it's like 26 inches tall, 20
Something
inches
like
tall.
that. It's big.
It's tall, so like it's if you're going to put it in the engine bay, you need a very large or very tall column that you're going to be able to sit it in.
Mm-hmm.
Doable, but then a lot of times you put it in the car, and then that's where it becomes a problem because now you have oil storage in the car. It really should be behind a firewall. If you put it in the trunk can work, but then you have really long lines between the trunk and the engine bay. Again, it should be behind a firewall. And then putting the tank so far away from the engine can bring with it its own set of complexities to it as well. And it's just one of those things where, like, man, it's all like, if you need 2.5-3 gallons of oil for an oil change, that gets real expensive if you're using nice oil.
Yeah, that's going to get real pricey. You're at like, what, $50 for a 5-liter roughly?
Yeah.
So, that's $150 plus a filter. It's like, oh.
Yeah, it can get expensive. Boy, it's just, there's the noise.
Yeah.
It is not quiet. That was one of the things when we first started the car and we're running it with the dry sump. We're like, is it supposed to be making this racket? Like, you can even see the lines move because there's just so much oil moving through the lines, and there's air bubbles and liquid oil, and it's just like, so it sounds like ka-chunk, ka-chunk, ka-chunk. It's loud. So, like, if you could put it in the engine bay, maybe. But, boy, I just don't know.
I don't know. I mean, even look at, considering the dimensions on, like, the 3-gallon one, the 18 by 9. Like, that's a big jug. That's like 2 milk jugs.
Yeah.
Stacked on top of each other.
Yeah, it's
somewhere.
not That's not fitting in the engine.
No, that doesn't.
It would have to be the skinny vertical tank.
Yeah, and then you have other worries about things
Yeah.
coming up from the bottom and draining your oil for you.
Yeah. The other thing too is that like the lines. You get a lot of complexity with the lines from the pump to the engine to the tank and back and forth. When it's a race car and you're not just putting thousands and thousands of miles on it, it's something where you can go back and inspect the lines, make sure that something hasn't moved, nothing's rubbing, the exhaust isn't starting to like melt through or rub through the line or something like that. Because you're using the car for relatively short bursts, then you come back, you go through it again, you check everything over, and then you put it back out there on the track. Whereas, when we daily drive cars, boys, sometimes months go by before I open the hood on my daily driver.
Yeah.
For better or for worse. But like with the dry sump and all the extra complexity and plumbing that you're bringing to the table, that might not be ideal as well. You could, kind of maybe work yourself into a problem there if something got loose, if one of the lines was rubbing.
Yeah, absolutely. Or even when you're making your lines, if you do like a field serviceable setup, what if you don't get a compression collar right?
Yeah.
What if your hose builder used the wrong grade hose if you went somewhere and that collar is slipping off because it's not biting into the meat of the hose? Like you could end up with a major issue real quick. That's just gradually like and then it's all over with the crying.
All of these things could be solved.
Yeah.
It could fit. But ultimately what it comes down to as well is, for the most part, daily driven cars, if you're just driving around on the street, you're not using the car in such a way, like with sticky tires, high cornering loads, all these sorts of things, where you would actually need a dry sump tank and all this complexities. And so if the stock oiling system, which is much simpler and much less complex, is sufficient for street driving, then, ultimately with all this complexity and all the expense of the dry sump, does it make sense for a street car? And the answer, I think, in 99.9% of the cases is no.
I agree.
And there's a related note to this this is the next one. Is it a good idea to delete the AC in your street car?
No.
No, not usually. Like
absolutely not.
We're having a hot summer this year. It is you might have heard, and my AC does not work in my yellow car, and I drove it this week. And driving in was fine. Driving home was miserable.
Oh yeah.
Because it was like 85, 90 degrees, and it's just like, well, you want that 90-degree air with the windows up or 90-degree air with the windows down? The choice is yours.
It's kind of brutal, so I'm thankful that in the Forester I have really nice AC. It'll drive you out eventually, but those first few, when you're driving that first little while, that hot air.
Yeah, it can be tough.
That's a hard one. It's like, well, yeah, there's some weight savings and some things like that, but again, it only makes sense really to me if it's a race car, because you're not going to use it.
Yep.
But if you were to do something like just take the belt off or any of those things, you can end up with other problems where maybe down the road you want to put a belt back on and you've now lost your compressor, contaminated your entire system, and so you're putting a whole new system in.
Yep.
So it's just best in that case to leave it there.
And where it's related to the dry sump is a lot of the dry sump kits on the market, well, you have to remove the AC to make room for the dry sump pump. The Roger Clark kit, because it sits underneath, you could probably get away with it. But yeah, it's just AC in a street car. Maybe it's just because I'm getting older. Maybe it's because I'm getting wiser. But I think AC in a street car is like, that's a good thing.
It makes good sense. I mean, like the Prius had electric-driven AC, and that was glorious. Non-race car, the epitome of non-race car. There, like, it was glorious because no parasitic draw.
Right.
So it's like, well, why not just run it all the time?
Yeah. If you got the battery for it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's see. I guess related to comfort.
Yeah.
Race seats in a street car. Fixed back race seats. I've done it. Have you done it?
I have not. I have the OEM seats with 130K on them, with the dual level heat.
Okay. Wow.
Because it's the schnazzy. It's one pinky up. It's not leather. It's
that's
cloth.
Nice.
So it's not it's not the LL beam, but door pillar speakers and heated seats. I was like, yes. So when it's minus 20, my car's in the garage because she's a garage queen. But when I have to get out, I'm like, I seem a little chilly, and let me just doot, and then the warmth and the toastiness.
That is nice. When I was younger, I did this, and I did not realize how nice it is to be able to set the angle of the back of the seat at will, like pulling a lever to set that. boy, it turns out that's really nice. And with the fixed back seat, even if you like, I went to a place that had seats to choose from. I sat in them. I picked the one that was, was comfortable at the time, and it was. But it was one of those things where anything more than about 30, 40 minutes in the car, and it just started to get uncomfortable because the back was fixed back. It was rigid. Mm-hmm. And so there's a certain comfort element there. Again, maybe because I'm older, maybe because I'm wiser, that is just not worth that sacrifice anymore.
Yeah.
But there are a couple other safety considerations here. One being a lot of the lesser expensive fixed back seats have got tubes that basically are part of the support in the seat, and those can be troublesome in a side impact. So some of these seats do not have like FIA ratings, so you can actually be exposing yourself to an additional risk in the case of a side impact with these seats, potentially. So that's where there's something to be considered there. The biggest one though is if you have a fixed back seat that has the two openings for the harness, but then it comes down over your waist and it's got the lines for like a 4-point or 5-point harness, but you basically only have your seat belt, your 3-point seat belt. One, it's hard to get that to attach properly. If you can't get that to work properly, and then you have to put in like a 4-point harness, then how do you do that? Because really, like, the ways to put in a harness like that to actually have it be effective and safe is actually pretty challenging. Really, it comes down to putting in a cage. Harness bars are largely frowned upon at this point because, if those are the basically the support members for the seatbelt, it has to be properly designed and properly strong so that in the case of an accident, it would actually function. And it spirals on from there, but like Cliff Notes version is the other part of it is if you're in a fixed back seat with a 4-point harness and you don't have a cage and something should happen where the car, say, rolls and you cannot kind of squish out of the way of the belts, it can basically make your head and neck a focal point of some of this impact in the case of a roof collapsing. So if you don't have the cage for extra support and you're locked in with a 4-point or a 5-point harness, you could be like in a worst case scenario, there could be some extra jeopardy there for you.
Yeah.
And because of all of that too, this is why a lot of tracks now require you to have basically a cage with like at least a rear hoop for the harnesses, or you just have to run your 3-point belt. So if you put in the race seat and you take some kind of creative measures to get it installed so that it's not proper, like maybe if the shoulder belts are too low so it's going to pull down on you too much in an impact or something like that, well, you're not going to be able to do a lot with the car there. And if you put in a harness bar, some tracks aren't letting you use that. And then there's the submarining problem. So 4-point harness, basically like 1, 2 across the lap belt, and then 3, 4 to come over your shoulders. Well, you can slide out of the seat still. Yeah. And there's people that have had issues with that in certain cases and impacts. And so now 4-point harnesses are basically banned at most organized tracks. So they're, again, like if you put in the seat, you figure out a way to kind of creatively mount a 4-point harness, well, there again, it's still probably not going to be that safe. And you might not be able to run the car in a lot of tracks or maybe any of the tracks. So It's one of those things where the safety downsides of putting in a race seat can be high.
Probably outweighs the cool factor of like, I just put in a race seat. Well, did you though?
Well, and I guess the biggest thing other than the comfort side of it for me would be, if I put something in my car that means that I can't do something that I want to do with it, like take it to the track, well, geez, does that make sense then?
Yeah, absolutely not.
Yeah. Especially when it's like that's where you could enjoy it the most.
Yeah.
If you had your race seat in there, and which brings us to the next point. Sorry, there's a lot of safety stuff there.
All right. Safety is pretty important to us.
Well, but there's an underlying theme here, which is doing a lot of race car things to a street car, and there's some pretty big trade-offs that can be overlooked.
Absolutely.
And so this one is putting a cage in your street car.
Oh man.
Would you is it advisable or is it not advisable to drive a caged car on the street?
I would not want to do it. I really, not just for the in and out, the accessibility there, but there's things all around you now that are, weight, great, safe,
Yeah.
great, really not set up for what you're about to do with it.
Potentially.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's the biggest thing is where, you put in the cage. Well, now you have to run the seats. You've got the harnesses. So basically, like, I guess from that standpoint, you're doing everything right.
Yes.
So kind of like what we talked about a minute ago is doing everything wrong, but now you're doing it all right. You've got the cage, so you can properly mount the harnesses. You can run a 5 or 6 point harness. Fixed back race seat.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, isn't this safer because you've got all this cage in the car in the case of an impact? Well, cages are designed in assuming that the driver's wearing a helmet.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where, like, that's the problem, because all of the cage bar placement and stuff it is around the driver. It is to protect the driver, but it is again assuming that the driver has a helmet, so that if there was some kind of an impact that moves your head would have the helmet on, and the helmet's going to make contact with the cage,
yep.
not your melon,
not the brain bucket.
Yeah, and if you're driving around and you're in your race car, like, are you going to really have the belts tight as they need to be? Is it going to be looser because it's a little bit more comfortable? And then that can cause its own set of problems. But ultimately, it's just, if you're not going to wear a helmet in a car with a cage, in the case of an accident, with everything else withstanding, you are in a lot more potential jeopardy with regards to your head and your brain and getting injured that way.
Yeah.
That's why cars that don't have cages, they've got all the airbags and stuff. So when you put in a cage, you get rid of all that, and so now you're left with the cage, but you really need the helmet piece of that.
Yeah.
Piece of that puzzle.
The cage, the airbags are your cage.
Right. And I mean, in the case of a Subaru, I mean, the chassis is really strong in and of itself.
Yep.
But it's far away, and like the cage, because it has to sit inside, it gets closer, it creeps in. So, yeah, it can cause its own set of problems.
Yeah.
I wish it was easier to say that. And some of these race classes, like in Grid Life, that's why some of the street classes, you just need a main hoop and behind. So like your driver's seat is in front of this cage, but then it's kind of this half and half. So like you can still put the harnesses in, but you don't have the cage in the front. It's just in the back. It gets a little bit weird, but yeah.
I don't know, logistics of like getting in and out of a caged car, like being also of an age, I'm like, I don't want to do that.
Yeah. No.
That's not my jam.
Ooh, which brings me to another one, actually related to cages, bolting cages, which for the most part I think have gone by the wayside. But there was a period there where there was a lot of bolting cages on the market, or that was kind of looked at favorably, I guess. Don't do it.
No, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of those cages, not only were they just bolted into the car, but parts of the bars, to make it easier to ship, were like two pieces, and so then a bolt went through them to lock the bars together and stuff. It's yeah, it is not anywhere near the same level of protection as an actual properly built, properly installed cage.
Right.
That's why most racetracks now don't accept that. So if you need a cage and you're really gonna do it, you got to do it right.
Yes, do it once, do it right. Don't be the do it nice, do it twice kind of person.
Yes. All right. The last couple, down to it.
Hmm.
Okay. Well, boy, these are all like. I feel bad that this is all related to daily stuff. But, a 600 horsepower daily.
Theory behind that sounds great, right? I'm going to have 600 horsepower daily driver. It's going to be so much fun all the time.
Yep.
It's going to be just nothing but wow. Yeah, until you're stuck at like 63rd Avenue and 119 and you're sitting there waiting, and you have to then like put in what's going to be a very stout clutch and then have to release it. And driving it just generally, I mean, even the Forester is a 400 horsepower, but it's a latent 400 horsepower.
Yeah.
It kind of sucks because you're waiting, and you have to really stab it and steer it to get it to do things.
Yeah.
And it's enjoyable because it's still fun because boost gauge goes up, mile goes up, but on a practicality side, boost gauge goes up, fuel consumption goes down.
Well, but even then, there's a big difference between 400 horsepower and 600 horsepower. And in part why I picked that number is because a lot of times the people that call in and they say that they want to make 600 horsepower.
Yeah.
A lot of times, if we talk to you, well, the car's stock now, but you want to go from stock to 600. For some reason, like that's kind of this number that people look at and kind of zero in on, but coming from zero. Because even up to 350 to 400, that's a big step up from stock.
Yes.
There's a lot of differences in driving the car from stock to 400 horsepower. Most people, if you've never driven a modified car, if you put them in a 400 horsepower car, it's going to feel unbelievably fast. And if you tell them, well, this is actually a 600 horsepower car, they would totally believe it. Yeah, and then you show them the dyno sheet, like, nope, this is actually 400 horsepower. Be like, I had no idea. I had no idea just that extra, 100, 150 horsepower would feel that different, that fast, but it does.
That's
and
true.
Like 600 is like, that's a whole different kettle of fish.
That is, and I don't know what that number is that they're chasing, because like I took, back in the day, I took a C606 around Pikes Peak.
Yeah.
The racetrack, not the mountain.
PPIR.
Yeah, PPIR. And I had a ball, that's 505 horsepower, big, scary, yeah.
Yeah.
It was fun. I had a lot of fun driving somebody else's car, but it didn't feel that far off. Like, it wasn't that separated from what I've got going on.
I'm gonna guess. This is just a guess. If I'm wrong, tell me in the comments below. But I bet you it's because if you look at all of the cars that are out there that you could buy that make 600 horsepower, there's very, very few, and you're probably in the exotic range. Like you're in a really fancy car territory for something that just from the factory makes 600 horsepower. But you get, at this point, 400 horsepower technology's come to the point where like that's not that crazy. That isn't weird, wild, and outlandish anymore. That seems, boy, for lack of a better term, pedestrian.
Oh.
Yeah, I know. I know. But it's that used to be like way back in the day. I mean, that was 400 horsepower was almost out of reach. It took a long time for us to get to the point where, okay, we know how to make a Subaru that can be reliable that makes 400 horsepower. That was a challenge. But like 600 was like, it was way off there. That was rarefied air. But now people have figured out these EJs more.
Mm-hmm.
Are there proven, tested paths to make that much power? Yes. So it's like, you can look around at all these cars. Like, if I could build my Subaru to 600 horsepower, I'm going to make more power than most every other car out there. And, like, there's now these handful of paths to get to that point where, okay, well, now this makes it seem attainable and much more reasonable. But still, there's just so many more concessions that you're making to get to that 600 horsepower level in terms of drivability.
Absolutely.
In terms of cost.
Man.
Like you're talking about a pretty fancy engine build to get to the point where you can make 600 horsepower and hold it reliably.
Right.
Pretty fancy turbo and fuel and intercooler, all of it. I mean.
And if it's not a 6-speed car, 6-speed tranny swap.
Transmission. Well, and let's talk about brakes and suspension.
Yeah, if you do all of the go fast and none of the other stuff, like someone who's got a really great beard did back in the day.
We've all been there.
You can end up with a neat situation where you can just nail it, and your car may have had a trailer hitch on it, and it kind of goes when you get on it really, really hard.
Well, and you're going to probably find out, like, one of the reasons that all these exotic cars cost so much. Well, it's not just the power in the engine.
Yeah,
they also got really big brakes.
Yeah,
they have
stop and steer.
Really fancy and well sorted out suspension. And it's like the vehicle dynamics of a Subaru that makes 600 horsepower. Like, it changes dramatically.
Absolutely.
It's even from what the power that an STI makes.
Mm-hmm.
A 600 horsepower STI, the things that car is doing are wildly different than the stock car. And you can overwhelm your brakes, you can overwhelm your suspension so easily. It's so hard to get. There's so many pieces to the puzzle to get to the point where you can make that power and have the car handle properly, stop properly. Can it be done? Yes. But a lot of times it's just you're coming at it from like an angle where you're ignoring all of those other parts of the car, other systems that are really essential to get the car to be fun and actually handling that.
Yes.
in that power range, and then like it can cost as much to get the brakes and the suspension and everything dialed in. It probably even cost more than the whole engine build, or
probably
about the same.
More. But I mean, it's so worth it. I mean, like I had all the power, and then I had little bitty Forester brakes.
Yeah,
and that was exciting.
Yeah,
not always fun, but exciting.
They'll work once.
Yeah, like they'll slow you down
once,
one time.
Yeah, you need to do that again, and they're like, "You want me to do what?"
Yeah, I'm gone.
I'm out. Yeah, burst of flames.
Yeah.
And I guess the answer there is like, this is where getting familiar with cars that are modified to different levels, to be able to make a better decision is important. Talk to people that have done it before, riding cars that are, at various different levels of tune, kind of zero in on what your actual target is, what your actual want is, versus just kind of fixating on a number.
Get a good feel. Do some field research.
Yeah.
You can call us. We'll ruin your Christmas. We'll let you know. It's like, I'm sorry, 600 horsepower is not going to be fun, but especially on like a 2-liter car. You're like, oh, I have an EJ20 and I want to make 600 horsepower. It's like,
yeah, great,
but here are the things.
Can it be done? Yes, but wow, like the difference between us. I mean, that's a lot.
Sorry, EJ20 guys. I'm not trying to pick on you. It's just one of those things. It happens.
Well, and I guess to be fair, it's what's interesting. It'll be interesting to see how this new the FA24 changes things, because that's changing the formula a bit.
It is.
It's making some of this power more attainable more easily than it ever has been before in the Subaru chassis.
Crazy magic wizardry.
And it is a good chassis, but you definitely have the brakes issue.
Yep.
Because it's basically no real different brakes than the previous WRX where you didn't have the Brembos.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's all of that is still there, and fueling is such a big challenge with those cars.
And transmission.
And transmission, drivetrain. Yeah, there's that too.
Yeah, but the FA chassis, like the FA engines, oh man, that's like
it's changing the game a little bit, but the supporting mods, the other things necessary for proper vehicle dynamics, those are all still the same, and they're going to need attention just the same in the new chassis as it did in the GD, GR,
chassis.
Yeah. All right, so the last one that I've got here. We're getting calls now because we've talked about putting the sequential in the Pikes Peak car.
Mm-hmm.
A sequential in a street car.
Man, that sounds fun as hell, but just...
This is the dream. I mean, the sequential, like paddle shift, whatever, that is the dream for me.
That'd be so cool.
It's totally what I want. But it's becoming more attainable, more possible than ever before for Subaru.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like the 600 horsepower thing, where it's like, I think it's grabbing people's imagination more, and again, it's more attainable than it has been before. So it seems like, okay, well, maybe I can make this work. Maybe it's worth making some of these concessions.
Maybe. But is it? I don't know. Like, it's cool to think about in theory, but I think longevity, like long-term, like wear parts.
Yeah.
There's going to be some driveline wear and tear there that you're going to go through it. You're going to have consumables there that you are probably not budgeting for. It's just a thing that, no one really thinks about that half of the coin anyway, until you're in it and you're like, oh, well, what do you mean I need to rebuild this thing? I've only had it for 10,000 miles.
Right. And at 10,000, that's actually a lot.
Yeah.
You're probably, it's certainly possible that you'd have to get in there and fix something well before that.
Right.
They're not bomb-proof. They're intricate.
Mm-hmm.
And the biggest thing is it's that harshness of the engagement. If you're going to use that sequential shifter without pushing in the clutch to make that shift so harsh, like that's it. I mean, it's like if you had a piece of, I don't know, if you had a big piece of metal with a ball peen hammer and you're just whacking it. I mean, that's kind of the force that you're implementing every time you shift gears that way.
Right.
It's like, well, if it's this little piece of metal, like how long until you've put enough divots in that like the metal's bent or the metal is compromised and
deformed right away. But it's cool to think about.
Yeah.
But it feels highly impractical, unfortunately.
Yeah. I think, I mean, could you drive a car with a sequential on the street?
Yes.
Yes, you could certainly drive it on the street. Is it something that I would just would you use it driving to the grocery store? No.
No.
I think that's kind of a waste of what that does. Like,
yeah. I mean, there's nothing wrong with rowing gears. Like, that's not a difficult strain. And, I mean...
Well, and you can make the argument, like, okay, I'm going to put the sequential in, but I'm going to use the clutch unless I'm going to the track. And then that's the only time that I will try and sequential shift with. And, like, well,
yeah, sure.
Maybe.
I mean, you could say that.
I knew a guy locally that this is before sequentials existed, but he daily drove a dog box.
Oh.
And part of what he did was he had 2 complete gear sets. So that he had two boxes built. So like, all right, I'm driving my dog box, and if I run into a problem with this, I pull this one out, put the other one in, then I get the rebuild parts for this one, rebuild it, and then I put it back. His whole passion was working on the car and doing all this stuff, and so like to him, this was totally just like that was fine. That was the way of it, and it worked for him.
That's a trip.
But like, he also didn't. He used the clutch to shift most of the time. He rarely basically shifted without the clutch, because he knew that there was extra wear there, and since he's the one that's going through and replacing everything, he's trying to minimize within reason the time to do that. But he would take the car out and track it, and it was totally badass. Yeah. You can do it.
Yeah.
But there's concessions that are being made there, and then the other part of it with the sequential especially is, like I talked about in the sequential video, if you want to be able to flat foot shift and just like bang the lever, pull the paddles, whatever, you really need a standalone to do that. You can do it by lifting off on the gas, but then that's all on you as the driver of how you're using the car and how you're putting those inputs in to make that work and to make it reliable. If you make a mistake, you don't lift off the throttle enough, you don't push the lever hard enough to get into the next gear, you get that partial engagement, and you hear this pong. Like, well, now you probably just lost a gear, and now you're going in there, and now you're doing maintenance. And the other thing with the sequentials too is that a lot of them have short service intervals, because like if you're starting to get these dog teeth and rings and stuff to wear, you want to catch them and replace them before the wear is so bad that a piece falls off, something breaks. You get this hardened steel floating around in the gear bath, and then takes out gears and gets more expensive.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, it can happen. So it's not the same. It's not the same as in terms of longevity and I don't know how reliable the stock SA transmission is. It has super high cool factor, 100%.
Very high cool factor.
100%. But it just comes with this reliability trade-off.
It does. It definitely does. It's like, well, if you have it, great. Would I? Like, if I had all the things to do the thing to the Forester to make it, to have a sequential, I think I'd rather focus that energy on something else related to the driveline or anything of that nature. But I do really like, how stout and, big the 6-speed feels. Because you nailed it. Like, it's a precision instrument. It's not like... it's not like I'm lighting a fuse and blasting a cannon off of the bow of a ship.
Right.
I'm now a mile away.
Yeah.
With a finely tuned precision instrument.
Yeah.
I'm laser focused, not just big beefy tough parts.
And it's there's just that extra cushion of reliability where you're pushing in the clutch and you're letting the transmission do its thing and then re-engaging the clutch. That's there's a reason that they developed synchros and all of this technology has gone into these transmissions to make them so that they are as reliable as they are now.
Yeah.
There's a reason for all of that, and it works. And it, to a certain extent, going back to these dog boxes or a sequential, which is basically a dog box but with a different configuration, that's where you're taking away some of these systems that bring with it that reliability.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I had a guy today who was talking to me about a drag Subaru with a Linko. Yeah. He just wanted a lever for every gear, and I was like, what? That's cool, but that is highly impractical.
Yeah, I think for daily driving, that that would
be
not
terrible.
Be, you have to that's a whole different definition of rowing. If
you're actually I've operated an excavator that's very similar to that. That's not how I want to drive to school or to work or
for drag racing.
It's phenomenal.
Like pull,
you just
pull, sure.
And you're
Makes
there.
sense.
But
Yeah.
I guess it's the right tool for the right job.
Comes down to the application.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I wish I could say that sequentials were great for daily driven cars or street cars, but I just we're not there yet, and I hate to say it, but I don't think we're going to get there.
Yeah,
I don't think the technology is going to go into a transmission, just the way that everything is moving. I mean, what it would really come down to is a dual clutch, some kind of a dual clutch transmission.
That'd be
For Subaru, they would actually make it so that, yeah, you can actually have the paddle shift or whatever that is as reliable as those dual clutches are.
Yeah, that'd be pretty neat.
Yeah, that one we might just have to, I don't know, just keep wishing for Subaru to do that, but I just don't see it in the cards.
I don't either.
No. All right, well, that's all I had on my list, DP. As we were talking through this, did you think of anything else that maybe we haven't mentioned so far?
The only other one that really comes to mind is tires.
Okay.
You know, like I've got 200 treadwell tires on my summer tires. And that's great in the hot weather.
Yeah.
But when it gets cold, and I don't even mean cold, like 45 and below,
Yeah.
things get real interesting.
Yeah.
You know, your handling capabilities have now gone from something that is like glued to the road to something that's like, yeah, we're on the road. We're kind of here, but, you know, we'll grab. But then if it rains, it's okay. And then when it gets real cold, like I've used 200 treadwear tires on snow.
Yeah.
I drove a very short distance. It was about a half a mile. And put on my snow tires because I have a dedicated set of snow tires. But it was really a humbling experience to be like, well, I mean, now it's no-wheel drive.
Right.
As opposed to being a true all-wheel drive car, it's like, well, no, now nothing's happening. You know, you let the clutch out in any gear, and it's just like, no.
That's one of those things where you kind of have to experience it, but once you do, like it is not fun.
Right.
That where it happened to me years ago was had summer tires on, got caught out in one of these weird storms where it starts out raining, then it changes to snow, so you get this layer of ice, then with a little bit of snow on top of it, and you're driving, and I mean, no wheel drive, no wheel stopping. Like, the sensation of hitting the brake pedal and just feeling the ABS fully engaging and the car is not stopping, and your pedals just going to the floor, and you're at that point you become a passenger.
Yep.
You're just along for the ride, and you're like having to honk to get through the intersection because you can't stop.
Yeah, there's just nothing slowing you down. I mean, it's something I experienced also, you know, previous life working at a construction dealership. Track drive skid steers have the same problem.
Okay.
Where they have zero traction on ice and snow.
Sure.
And so it was, I took one out and intentionally took one stick in each direction and kind of went like that, much further than I had anticipated because I was heading right towards the dumpster and I was like,
oh no,
this is real expensive, it better catch.
Yeah.
And eventually it did, but I mean, circling back to tires, like make sure you've got the right rubber for what you're doing.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's great to have summer tires and winter tires. That's not for everybody if you don't have room.
Or just summers and all seasons.
But like get an all season and a summer tire. Then you can at least safely drive in the freakish rainstorm, snowstorm that happens.
Yep. And all season tire technology has come so far.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, is it the same as a summer 200 treadwear tire? No, but it's come a long way. That gap has closed a lot more than you would expect.
Right, they've narrowed that even on the other side with like cold and wet. Like there's some siping on some all seasons now to give you a little bit of that flex for a little bit more bite. No, it's not your WS90 Blizzak, but
well, it's what Michelin has got a crazy tire. It's the Pilot Sport 4S, is it?
Something like that.
I think the 4S is 4 season.
I think that's what the S was supposed to be for.
Maybe.
But,
it's it's an all season tire. It's not great in the snow, but everywhere else, I mean, it's good.
Yeah.
And they've got like different compounds of rubber, you know, in different places on the tire so that you can have grip and that sort of thing. I mean, there are good all season tires out there.
Yeah.
So it's something worth looking at, especially if you don't have room to store a second set of tires, second set of wheels and tires.
Yeah.
Look at a good all season because they have come a long way from even like the last 5 or 6 years.
Definitely.
They've changed a bunch.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, good call.
Thanks.
All right. Anything else you can think of?
I think we really hit all the things we were thinking about.
Okay. Well, so that's where we're going to wrap it up for you today. If you've got any other questions about things that you want to do to your car, but you want to, like, is this really a good idea? Leave them in the comments below. Maybe we'll come back, do a hey, what's your problem?
Yeah,
talk about
absolutely.
it, or do another one of these episodes. But this is just from a couple conversations we've had in the last couple of days, this is what was on our mind. So this is what we decided to rap about for the podcast. So
yeah.
Well, thanks very much for listening. Thanks for sticking around with us to the end. Thanks for your support as always. The best way to support us at the podcast is head over to flatironstuning.com. If there's anything there that you need, that support is what lets us come back and keep making this content for you. So thanks very much for listening. Thanks for your support. And as always, until next time, stay tuned to the Flatirons Tuning. Thanks everyone for tuning in to the Flatiron Syndicate Motorsports Podcast. Once again, we'd like to let you know that your support is what makes this show possible. Be sure to check out our online store at flatironstuning.com for any of your aftermarket or OEM Subaru parts needs. And as always, stay tuned with Flatirons Tuning.